Hello and welcome to Talk to Stu with me, Stuart Magoo. And in today's session, we are looking at ESA to Universal Credit migration. And I'm going to go through with you step by step how this should happen. So what I'm going to do is use information that is taken from the Benefits and Work website. So that's benefitsandwork.co.uk. Really useful website, lots of interesting information on there, so I do suggest you go and check it out. So I'm just going to go through this with you and kind of pick up on little bits in there and give a bit more detail if is required. But of course, if you don't want to watch this video, you can follow the link in the description and go and read the article for yourself. But if having somebody chat through things with you is what you're looking for, then you've come to the right place. So stick with me for this, and if you haven't done so already, please hit the like, share and subscribe buttons. Okay, so before we get into the main hub of the process from moving from employment support allowance over onto universal credit, the first thing you need to consider is, does this apply to you? So if you are on income related employment support allowance, then yes, you will be expected to move over to universal credit. Now, income related employment support allowance, if you're not sure, is where you have a financial assessment to see if you are eligible to receive the benefit in the first place. So that's basically looking at what money you have coming in every month, if any, and also what savings and capital you have had. So if you've had to go through that process of providing bank statements and all of those things, then the chances are you're on income related employment support allowance. If, however, you've been in work for quite a period of time prior to claiming employment support allowance, your national insurance contributions are maintained, then when it comes to making that application, you will qualify for contributory based employment support allowance. So if you have contributory based employment support allowance, then this video does not apply to you. Okay, it may be that in the future they are going to look at moving people from contributory based ESA onto the universal credit system, but there are no plans at the moment to do so. And if that does ever come into being the case, then this video will probably be out of date by then. So quick note for you there, just to let you know whether or not this applies to you. In the meantime, however, I'm using the Benefits and Work website to sort of basically run through this. I do find it to be a really useful website. Okay, it gives a lot of information and guidance, particularly aimed at people with disabilities, for claiming personal independence payment, universal credit, ESA, children's DLA, and more besides. They also deliver training to professionals, and they have a really useful forum on there too. I'm going to show you this website and the article that they've produced on this process. And here it is. Now, what I will point out is that in the top right-hand corner of the screen is my logo, not theirs. And their logo is right underneath my chin. And as you can see, it says Benefits and Work, guides you can trust. But it's in a very similar colour scheme to my logo. That's just a total fluke and coincidence. We're not affiliated in any way. Okay, so just to clear that up in case people think, hang on a minute. But anyway, so let's have a look at the whole managed migration and what you can expect. Now, the top question I get asked is generally, when will people have to move to universal credit? And it's been a bit confusing over the last couple of years, because originally, when the Conservatives introduced this plan, the plan was to move everybody by 2029. So a lot of my older videos do say 2029. So some people might have been surprised that they would be moved forward presently. They might have seen one of those videos in the past and gone, hang on a minute, you said this. And I did. However, they moved the goalposts, as they are wont to do, and they moved those goalposts last year. So since then, they created a new timescale by which everybody, and I do mean everybody, has to move over onto Universal Credit. Now, that process began in September 2024. Okay, so they started off, they say, with a small number of income-related ESA claimants on a test and learn basis, which is kind of true. It's also probably down to the fact that they didn't have enough staff on at the time, arguable as to whether they do now, but certainly during that period the DWP were going through a sort of big recruitment period to recruitment drive, to get everybody, or to get more people on staff to be able to do that. So from October they have quite considerably ramped that up and have been sending out more notices to people to migrate across. And indeed, a lot of people that I've been speaking to through this channel and other areas of my life have informed me that yes, that has accelerated quite a bit. Now, starting from February, which is now, as I record this video, the DWP aims to send out 63,000 migration notices every single month, which is crazy to think about, which is almost twice as many to what they've been sending out already. And yes, that is the pace at which they're going. Now, the reason for doing all of this, why they're doing it quite so quickly, I'm not entirely sure, but the whole point of Universal Credit when it was introduced, which was quite some time ago now, or around about 10 years, was for everybody to move over onto Universal Credit from Employment Support Allowance at some point, because it is Universal Credit. And that was assumed, or it was envisaged, that that would happen through a process that we call natural migration, which is where somebody's circumstances change, or they move house, or something happens and they have to reapply, and so they would then be moved on to Universal Credit. That didn't really happen at the rate that people were expecting. Generally speaking, people with long-term health conditions, their conditions don't really change that much, and they tend to live in the same property because they've had it adapted, so circumstances don't change as often as they sort of envisage. So they've had to push forward with this, very much so in the last couple of years. Obviously, there's some concerns for people with this happening. Firstly, with the number of people that are intended to be moved within such a short space of time, there's concerns about the capacity of the DWP to actually be able to deliver on that. And in doing so, there's concerns that there are going to be errors along the way. Hopefully, what I'm going to be explaining to you today will help you to reduce the likelihood of an error befalling you. So hopefully you'll be able to spot some of the pitfalls before they occur. That said, it's not going to be a perfect process for many people. These things never are. But equally, many people are reporting that they had a fairly sort of, I wouldn't say easy time of it, but certainly fairly simple, where everything happened as it should and things happened in the right way. So the plan is that final migration notices will be sent out in early December 2025, with the idea that everybody is going to be moved over by end of March 2026. Now, there are some exceptions to people having to move from ESA over to Universal Credit, but they are very, 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 very rare. Most people, even people that aren't able to manage their Universal Credit account online, or because they have a cognitive impairment that prevents them from doing so, such as a learning disability or neurological disability, things like that, will still be expected to move over. They will be expected to have a carer or somebody nominated that would be able to do that for them in certain circumstances. If you're not sure as to whether you might have an exception, then you would need to speak to a professional advisor about your personal circumstances. So generally speaking, that might only really apply to people that are on end of life care, for example, or have been given a terminal diagnosis where they're likely to pass in the next sort of 5 to 6 months or 12 months, something like that. So it's going to be very occasional situations where it does apply to you, but it's advised that you do get advice before assuming that will happen. So how does managed migration work? Managed migration is generally started by you receiving a Universal Credit migration notice inviting you to claim Universal Credit. Now, this is different to natural migration. Natural migration, as I said, is when you have circumstances change, or if you decide that you want to get ahead of the curve and move from employment support allowance over onto Universal Credit. You can opt to do that yourself ahead of receiving the managed migration notice. Now, when you receive that notice, the letter will give you a deadline to claim and will inform you that your existing benefit will end. It is really important that you act when this has been received. Okay, now it's possible that the letter might go astray in the post, but to be fair, that is quite unlikely. So you must keep your eye out for this letter as much as possible. And even if you maybe don't receive that first letter, the chances are you will receive a reminder letter as well. You're given 3 months to move over, but you must act on it as soon as possible. That is my strongest advice to you. Now, when I say act on it, I don't necessarily mean start the process, although it might be that you do start the process. It's more about what support you need to do that. If you're able to manage it on your own and you think you'll be fine filling in the online form, then that's absolutely fine. Crack on and do that. If you have any doubts, then you are probably going to need support from an organisation like the Citizens Advice Bureau, the CAB, or a similar disability support organisation that might be local to you, or maybe you use an organisation like Macmillan, which is a national organisation, but you might access that over the phone or the internet, something like that. Whatever support you need, it's best to request that support as early as possible, because there are going to be delays in receiving the support. Where we seeing numbers like 63,000, that the brunt of that is going to be borne by those services that provide that support, and generally speaking, services like that aren't going to be getting any extra funding like the DWP have to take on extra staff to deal with this. So it may well be that there's a waiting list. So as always, I'll put the link to the benefits advice finder from Turn to Us in the description, so do use that if you're able to pop your postcode in and find what advice and support services are available to you locally. But you must act on it very quickly. Now, if there's a reason that you cannot do it within that 3-month period, and it has to be a good reason, you can ask them to have your deadline extended, but you must do this before the deadline. Okay, it must be done before the deadline. If you try and do it after the deadline, then you're going to have to provide extremely very good reasons as to why you didn't, for them to be able to give you the transitional protection that you need and you may well have a period where you don't receive any benefits at all. Okay, so it is really important you do that. In exceptional circumstances, they may do that post factum, as in afterwards, after the deadline has passed, but it is only going to be rare occasions. However, if you are on a waiting list for support and you know that you've got an appointment with an advisor who's going to support you with this in some way, and you've got that in the diary, that might be a reason that you could extend it before the deadline. So, as I say, it says here, you can also ask the DWP to cancel your migration notice if it has been issued in error or in exceptional circumstances. So an error might be if you are on contributory-based ESA and they've sent it to you. That might be an error, for example. And those exceptional circumstances, as I say, you would need to seek advice as they advise. Okay, so that is very much the first element to consider. So let's have a look at transitional protection, because this is one of the areas where things get quite confusing. The top question that people ask is, will my UC payment be the same as my previous benefits? And that's a really difficult question to answer, because universal credit is assessed in a completely different way to employment support allowance. So what they look at, rather than just your personal circumstances, is also your household circumstances. Now that sort of does factor into employment support allowance, but it's looked at in a very different way under universal credit. So quite often there might be people who are part of a couple who maybe both are receiving employment support allowance separately. Maybe one is receiving employment support allowance and one is on universal credit. Maybe one is in work and one's receiving employment support allowance. The whole thing has to be sort of brought together. And so it might be in certain circumstances that you're actually making a dual application to universal credit, or a joint application is a better way of saying it, a joint application. So universal credit is generally made up of a standard allowance plus additional elements for different situations. So that might be, do you have children? Do you have caring responsibilities for somebody who's not a child? Do you receive housing benefit? All of those kind of things. So universal credit generally includes the amount for your rent, which would be your housing benefit, and for your children. So that is something that is important to bear in mind as well. Often people have housing benefit being paid directly to their landlord, just to save them the hassle of having to do that themselves, whereas under universal credit that would be paid to you and then you have to pay it to your landlord. There are certain circumstances where you can have that changed, but generally speaking they pay you one whole amount and then you take out the amount for your rent. Now more often than not, that amount that's paid is less than what you're used to receiving under housing benefit, not usually by much, but it is a bit less than. So you have to kind of be aware of that. It is usually paid at the rate of the local housing allowance for your area, so you would need to check as to what the local housing allowance is to know exactly what amount you would be getting. Other reductions could be applied to that as well. So again, it might be that you need advice on that. And of course, there is more information on the Benefits and Work website about those things. So if you are moved to universal credit under managed migration and your universal credit entitlement is less than your legacy benefit amount, then actually you should be entitled to what they call transitional protection to make sure that you get the same amount that you're getting from legacy benefits. However, transitional protection will only apply if you make your claim before the final deadline day. So that's another reason to make sure that you do. Additionally, it will erode or reduce if extra elements are added to your claim or if benefit rates increase. Okay, seems odd, but the transitional element is kind of seen as a separate block to the universal credit element. So if any circumstances change, then that could affect your entitlement to that transitional element. So that's something that you need to be aware of. It's really important that you always inform them each time your circumstances change, whether that be a change of address or a change in your health condition, if you're going abroad for a period of time, those kind of things. But whether it's a permanent change in circumstance should have an impact on whether you still receive that. So what a lot of people find is that initially they get the transitional protection and that's going okay for a period of time, and then something in their life changes, they have to inform the DWP, and that transitional protection is taken away and they're on less money. Additionally, transitional protection amounts aren't uprated with inflationary increases, so if your universal credit increases, that element increases, the transitional protection doesn't. So if it goes up by 1%, you may not notice much of a difference at first, but over a couple of years, you will notice a difference. And if we have an increase such as we did last year, where the interest rates were very high and inflation was very high, then you would notice quite a bit of disparity there. Okay, so the payment element of transitional protection should be that in the first instance, when you move over, you should be receiving the same amount of money. Okay. Not necessarily and not 100% guaranteed, but for the majority of people, that will be the case in the first instance. The other element of transitional protection is the limited capability for work and work-related activity. So what does this mean? Well, currently, you're probably in either the ESA work-related activity group, or you would be in the support group for ESA, one of those two. Now, transitional protection means that when you move over onto universal credit, you shouldn't have to go through the work capability assessment again. You should get the transitional protection and you should be put into the same group. So when you get your transitional protection, you should be moved into the equivalent group that you were in previously. So if you were in the work-related activity group, then you should be moved over into the limited capability for work group, which is LCW for short. Slightly confusingly, if you were in the support group previously for ESA, then you should be awarded the limited capability for work-related activity group, the LCWRA group. Okay, it is a bit confusing. It's a bit of a mouthful compared to the word support. Why they couldn't keep them the same, I'm not really sure, but that is the equivalent group. So when you move into that group, you are looking at £390.06 per month. If you're in the limited capability for work element, then you will be getting a payment that will be similar to what you were receiving under employment support allowance in that group. So these elements should apply as soon as your claim starts. And you should not have to wait for the relevant period, which is 3 months, which ordinarily happens for a new universal credit claimant, before they can receive those elements. So you have to make sure that when you are making that application in the first place, you make it very clear in your application that you are currently receiving employment support allowance, you have had a managed migration notice, and that you are which group you're already in. Usually towards the end of the universal credit application, there is a box that says, is there anything else you wish to tell us? If there's nowhere that you've previously been able to tell them that, then make sure you put it in that box. And if you are contacted talking about having a work coach and doing claimant commitments and things like that when you're already in the support group for ESA, then you should question as to whether you have been put into the limited capability for work-related activity. Don't delay, question it straight away. Okay? And that is what you should expect. Now, going back up the screen a little bit is when will you get your first payment of Universal Credit. So the first payment is 5 weeks after a person makes their claim. Okay, so this can be quite difficult to work out, but it's best if you try to time your application with your receipt of your last payment. This should give you at least a little bit of a running jump at it in terms of what money that you still have, whereas if you make the claim before that payment has been received, then you might not receive that, and you've got to wait 5 weeks before you get that payment coming in. Now, if you are going to struggle with that, you can take out an advance payment. But the problem with an advance payment is that it's essentially a loan. And so this has to be paid back from your Universal Credit account as you go throughout the rest of the year. So that means your Universal Credit payment is reduced. Now, you can either take this over 12 months or 24 months now, where previously it was always over 12. But you have to think very carefully about that as well, because if you take it over 12 months, then your payment will be a little bit higher that you're making towards that, which means your Universal Credit will be lower for that 12-month period, and but you do get it paid off more quickly. Whereas if you take it over 24 months, your Universal Credit payment will be a little bit higher, but you will have to pay it back over longer. Okay, so it'll be a longer period of time before your Universal Credit returns to the level that it should. So what are the main differences between UC and ESA? This is very important. So UC is usually paid as a single monthly payment instead of fortnightly, so that means that you'll have to budget in a slightly different way. The housing costs element of Universal Credit is usually paid to you rather than your landlord, as we discussed earlier. So you have to budget in that way as well to make sure that that is put aside for you. If you're able to open a separate bank account for that can often be helpful to do that. And you can just have it set up as an automatic payment with that, but do bear in mind that you have to keep checking on your award each month because it could change. People often get caught out with changes to Universal Credit awards, so it does mean sort of keeping your eye on that if you're setting it up in that way. But either way, it might be that when you get your Universal Credit payment, there's quite a gap between when you do that and when you have to pay your rent. So it's certainly worth bearing that in mind. Universal Credit is usually paid as a single payment into one bank account. So if you have a partner, you might be used to the payments being split. So you have to kind of get your head around that going into one bank account and work that out between the two of you if you're able to. Obviously, when this first came in with Universal Credit, quite a lot of issues were raised from charities who could see that that would be problematic, particularly if somebody is in a relationship where there's difficulties between the two people in that relationship. So so think about that carefully. Also, quite important, Universal Credit is a digital system. Your claim is made online and you maintain it through an online journal. That is really important to bear in mind, because if you aren't great with using the internet or filling in online forms or responding to messages that are sent to your Universal Credit app or Maybe you don't have an app, you just have to remember to log in on your laptop. That can be quite tricky to do, so you may need extra support with that, which you'll need to seek out. So finally, you will normally need to sign and adhere to a claimant commitment detailing your responsibilities, and you'll be placed into one of 4 conditionality groups. Now, generally only 2 of these apply to people under employment support allowance. So if you're in the support group and you move into limited capability for work-related activity group, then you commit to having no commitments, which is an odd thing, but there are still some commitments even though there's no commitments, and I'll explain more of those in a second. And the other conditionality group is the work preparation group, which is for people that are previously in the work-related activity group who have to move into the limited capability for work group. And that is generally doing things to potentially prepare you for going back to work at some point, such as writing a CV, doing some voluntary work, maybe doing some retraining, things like that. So the commitment element for the non-committal group and with the work preparation group is that you need to basically respond to everything as and when it comes in. So it might be that you are receiving requests to go into the job centre for some kind of work-focused interview, something like that, or it might be to discuss your finances, do a means test again, for them to look at what transactions have been going on in your bank account, those kind of things. So if those requests come in, then you must respond to them immediately. So it might be that you're not able to get into the job centre for some reason to do with your health or disability, so you'd need to contact them and make sure that that is communicated and possibly arrange an alternative such as a telephone interview, or actually attend on that session. If you don't respond or don't attend any appointments or whatever that is made for you, then you could get sanctioned and you may lose some of your income. So it's really important that you respond to those things as they come in as quickly as possible. So the DWP can agree to alternative payment arrangements, such as paying it twice a month or paying rent directly to your landlord or splitting the universal credit between you and your partner in some circumstances. But you would need to seek advice on this to see whether those circumstances would apply to you. So, how then do you actually begin the process of making a universal credit claim? Well, it's fairly simple. You just go over to Google and you search for universal credit, and it will pretty much be the first result to pop up. You can then go onto the universal credit website and you can find out everything that you'll need to apply in the first instance, and of course you can then click the button to do that. If, however, you are having any difficulty with accessing or applying in any way, shape or form, then do get in touch with the Citizens Advice Help to Claim service. There is a free phone number which you can see there on the screen, and I'll flash it up as well in big numbers for you to write it down, but also it will be in the description for this video below. And they can help you do this in lots of different ways, but it may be possible in certain circumstances, but not all, to organise a 3-way call with the DWP to make a telephone claim. That, as I say, is just in certain circumstances, so don't just automatically assume that you will be able to do it that way. Most of the time they will look at supporting you to make that claim yourself using either your phone, your tablet or your laptop. Okay, and finally, is there anything that you need to think about to prepare beforehand? Well, as I say, a couple of these things are repeating things I've said before. You need to think about, are you receiving your full entitlement, first of all? Are you currently getting everything that you should be? And making sure that everything is fine with your current employment support allowance claim. Think about the timing of your universal credit claim. Your first payment is 5 weeks after you make your initial claim, so it's really important that you think about exactly when you're going to do that. Is it going to land? Are you going to do that when you receive your last payment from, or receive a payment from employment support allowance? So you've got a couple of weeks of money. Are you going to time it to when your rent is paid, if that's a different date, and those kind of things? Think about how you're going to budget during that period, because your first universal credit payment, obviously it's 5 weeks, it's quite a long time. That can be a very difficult period. There are services that could help you through that period. It might be that you can access a food bank. You may qualify for support through the household support fund, so do check that with your local authority. If the household support fund is still running, they do review that periodically, and it may well be that at the end of each quarter the household fund support fund is taken away. We don't know what the government's going to do with that until usually just before it's about to end. They say whether they're going to continue it or not, and it's different in each local authority as to how that's administered, so you would need to get in touch with your local council to see what approach they take, and also seek any debt advice about any overpayments that you're currently dealing with, of benefits or tax credits, because the DWP can automatically take that from your universal credit award. So if you're not expecting that, it could reduce your universal credit award further than you were expecting. So some really important tips there. Okay, so hopefully you found this video to be informative, if nothing else, on the whole process of applying for universal credit when you've been on employment support allowance and you've received a managed migration notice. If you have got further questions, as I say, you can join us for the live talk to Stu on the first Tuesday of the month, or you can check out the Benefits Support UK Facebook group, which is run by the very lovely Edward Brown, and there's a lot of useful guides on here as well. So things that are quite important to know when it comes to completing your How Your Disability Affects You form, for example, tools to help you PIP claim, things like that. But also in the general chat, you can pop a question in there, and Edward will get back to you as soon as possible. And again, there will be a link to this group in the description below. It's a very useful group, and it's a nice community of people as well, which is what we like. So yes, don't forget, if you found this useful, please like, share and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and hopefully you'll be able to get through that process without too much difficulty. So thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you all again in the future, and do stay well and stay safe. Take care. Bye bye.